August the 21st, 2022. Guys, I hope everyone's had a good weekend, and it's late on Sunday afternoon here. It's been raining for several days. And if you look at this satellite image, we're not just here to talk about the weather, but if you take a look at this top left corner, we're still in a river of rain throughout the southeast. And this is the Atlantic satellite, and it doesn't pick up further west than right there through Texas. But that's been coming across the nation. And I've mentioned that I'm above 300 feet sea level here where our small farm is. And so, and everything's in a runoff. Our garden and everything, there's not a lot of flat area, in other words. And it's been a blessing for us here. And it brings about a couple of things. But here in Mississippi, in the northwest section, we have what's called the Mississippi Delta. Across the river, you have the Louisiana Delta going up into Arkansas, and the Arkansas Delta, all part of the Mississippi River flood zones. And since ancient days, it has been tremendous farming that was shipped all over the world, whether it was soybeans, cotton, now there's catfish, there's all kind of things like that. And so I would like to hear, and I know I have friends all over Mississippi and Arkansas and Louisiana and into Texas and further north, but how is this rain affecting the lowlands? When you're dealing with the Delta, a lot of it's really flat. If you've seen any of the Highway 61 movies or about going down to the crossroads, you can tell there if you're not from the area. Very flat, very low. The rivers are very close. And when you get a big flood, they flood. Now that's how, from the Nile Delta to the Mississippi Delta, that our Father in heaven has for millions of years kept the nutrients in the soil very good, because that's why those floods is why the land is fertile, right? But when it comes time to harvest, and we're getting into that, again, August 21st, we're getting into the time to harvest crops. And my question again is, how is that affecting all of you guys in the flatlands of the deltas and anywhere in the U.S.? But you can see, again, it's been a river of rain. I'm not complaining, because there's so many people on this planet that are in drought, especially in our southwest, but all over the world. So, and I'm lucky, but I'm lucky to, again, be at the elevation that I am. God put me here. It's been in our family for over 50 years. And so I'm here. There's an old saying that bloom where you're planted, right? And so, and we love it here, so it was a blessing. But again, my concern in the top left and across the nation is the beginning of the fall harvest. It gets so wet that you can't get in there. You can't do whatever you got to do, whether it's late fertilizer, fall fertilizing, or crop harvesting, or just the ability to not flood out the crops. That's something we need to know, because there's places across this planet where that's happening. And we do know that man has since the 60s, and probably a lot longer than that, but that's when in the 60s is when LBJ admitted it. And you've seen the trailer on a lot of videos, that he who controls the weather controls the world. So we know there's manipulation. We know about HAARP, but really, guys, HAARP is old technology. Satellites basically now are the means of operation. So, and another thing, I think I mentioned in an earlier video, maybe last week, that a lot of people will say, well, we need to seed the clouds in a lot of different areas and make it rain in the southwest, things like that. But you do not create new elements. When you take that moisture and you push it into one area, it takes it from somewhere else. There's not new moisture created, it's just the manipulation of that rain. So what's good for one place is bad for the other. And I'm not saying that that's not happening, because that could be why we're seeing such a wild weather pattern now. we've had very little tropical activity. We had a small storm come through the Gulf. We've had a couple of other early tropical systems that were low in intensity in early June, but nothing of any consequence, nothing major. When I say major, not in devastation, but major in the powers that comes across the Atlantic, because the Earth is heating up, and it's not because of man-made events. Our shields are weak. The radiation is penetrating, and we're having one CME after the other. And there's been large CMEs. I think the one that hit Canada that knocked out the grid several years back, it was for a short period, but it heated the upper atmosphere up about 8 degrees. Think about that. So the more solar energy and the weaker your shields, the warmer that the planet gets. And we're seeing that with the drought in the southwest, with the rivers in Europe becoming impassable. And so our Father said, not by flood, but by fire, right? Of course. And that's a whole entire other video. And because a lot of people say, well, he did it once with the flood, and this time will be by fire. And that may be very well be right, because what happens when you don't have the big storms coming across the Atlantic? What happens to the planet? Does it get cooler or hotter? You know what happens. Those huge hurricanes that come and they last for 2 weeks, they pull so much of the hot surface temperature off the ocean, pull it into the upper atmosphere, guys, and cool it. Keeps the planet temperature down. And so we do know that regardless of the weapons of man formed against us, that God ultimately controls this weather. And so never forget, not by flood, but by fire. So as the earth heats up, will there be more, again, crop failure, famine, things like that? He promised it. He said, but if man would just turn back, if they would just turn around and look at where they've gone, look at where Satan has led them, and where they've been allowed to be led. I'm talking about all of humanity in one form or the other. Even if you were trying to do the right things, just the nature of the beast, of what you see, what you hear, is going on around you in your environment, that you can easily be led astray down this road of temptation, of riches and things like that, or money, whatever. So we all are at some point guilty, but then there's some that are evil, that you see in Roe versus Wade and across the planet, and the madness that has occurred since that was changed. That's pure evil. Why? Because what is Satan's main goal? To destroy humanity. What have we seen in the last few years? Really, let's go back 3 years nearly, with the, again, Operation Warp S. Got it? Look, if you could really get your hand on the real numbers, I'm not going to talk about them here, but you would see the the immense damage that was done by that, and it's still being preached. And so do you think that person who could end up going down in history worse than Hitler's numbers and maybe all the wars combined, do you think that's really the person that's going to save this civilization or this nation? Things are changing. They're never going back to the same. But Jesus is coming. And they're going to change forever. And they're going to change for the good. Some people's names will not be written in that book of life. Those that take the mark of the beast, whatever the final mark turns out to be, if you put all the things that's been put together against mankind, the totality of that could be the mark. We don't know exactly what it is, but a lot of people understand what's happening. And if you want to know how it's going to turn out for the vast majority of civilization before the end of tribulation, and guys, never be deceived, please don't, that Mark, Matthew, and Luke tell us that in those days after the tribulation, we shall see the Son of Man, not before that. Don't be deceived by the one that stands in the temple claiming to be God. Don't be pulled into that camp. because you're going to be in that losing camp. That's a lot of taking that mark in your mind and your forehead. Don't be deceived. Read Mark 13, Matthew 24, Luke 21. In those days, after the tribulation, they shall see the Son of Man. Now, if you want to go in there and manipulate those words to suit your preacher or your teachings or your stubbornness, that's up to you. You want to change the words, and those are spoken by Christ. He was asked a question. And so if you want to change his words, you do it. But you better understand we got a tribulation coming. You've got Christ returning, and then you've got the wrath of God that the last section of tribulation talks about. God's people will not be here during that time. But up to that time, you are to stand as a Christian warrior, defend your family, and stand proud before God. The reason you are here now is because you are a child of God. He loves you, and you fought in that war in heaven against Satan and his angels. That's why you were saved for this final generation, because God knew in your heart when he comes down and those 4 angels come down and seal all of God's people right before Christ returns. And when the seal of God is the knowledge of the truth of who you are, why you're here. And once you have that seal, Satan has no chance against you. Once you're sealed by God, that's it. Satan can't touch you. And then, if you understand Revelation, you are not affected by the second death. Only that change when Christ sets his foot down from this mortal body into the perfect spiritual body. Think about that. That's for a different time. Now, while we're on this video, to the far right, and as it gets dark tonight, you'll see right here these dots. That's the Azores Islands. And there's a system there that has a 20% chance of formation over the next 5 days. But something that's kind of strange about the weather is most of these storms are far south of the Azores, usually a couple 100 miles when they come off Africa coast. Now, we'll look at the projection, but it's got it headed, not due west, but pretty west. And so that's going to more than likely tell us that there's this high pressure system over the central section of the northern Atlantic is going to be building and keeping this thing on a straighter path. The weather's weird. Now, in the very center, you have circulation here, but it's in pretty dry air. But sometimes these things will fool you. See that? And also in the very southern part of the Caribbean right there. Check, it's almost starting to rotate. They're not talking about it yet unless it's been since I started this video. Anyway, going back to the flood, first flood, second flood, I know that's going to throw some folks off unless you've been a long-time students of the Hebrew, and then fire. First flood is in Jeremiah chapter 4, guys. It talks about all man was destroyed. And the way it talks about it is the way Genesis starts. The earth, in Jeremiah 4, God destroyed it because man had turned his back against God, and the fallen angels and their breed had taken over. We're seeing that again now. Most people don't, but it is here again. And that takeover, guys, is possession. Don't you see it in the swamp? Anyway, in Jeremiah it talks about chapter 4 again, the earth was destroyed by that, and it became void. Then in Genesis 1, it says it says in English the earth was void, but if you read it in Hebrew, it said the earth became void. So what's happening in Jeremiah 4, study it for yourself before you start slinging out something you don't know anything about because you're tied into the doctrines of man instead of the true word of God, is that in Jeremiah 4, that flood, nothing survived. No man survived. And the earth became void and without form. It starts again, Genesis 1. If you read it, Hebrew, the earth became void and without form, and then God started reforming it. Noah's flood did not wipe out mankind. Why? Noah was still there. The people he took aboard, the creatures that God made that he saved to repopulate the planet. That didn't happen in the first flood of Jeremiah. Why? Because in Genesis, the earth was void. Then what happened? In those days, in those 7 days, and you remember that day with the Lord is 1,000 years with man, so those 6 days of creation was actually more than likely 6,000 years, not 6 years. Understand, the Bible tells us 1,000 years with man is 1 day with God. The day of the Lord will be that 1,000-year millennium of Revelation. But God had to start all over. He created the animals. He created the plants for our food. Then he ended up creating man. Then Adam, the man that would lead through the prophets, many of them, through the Adamic bloodline to our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. If that throws you off, I didn't mean to do that, but it's time to start being aware of the Christ said, I'm the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. And what does that mean? The Word was with us then. It's with us now. It is Christ. And that Word speaks the truth. Again, look at Jeremiah, but we're going to do a video on that. I wanted to go through the entire book of Jeremiah, but things around the planet are happening very fast now, and I've got to try to stay on top of that change to everything that's happening very fast. I have to stay on top of it with the time I have to do the videos and to let people know what I think is happening. Right or wrong, I try to back it up with either information from research or with our Father's Word. And so, guys, we're heading to that point. And this time, when Christ sets his foot down, it's going to begin the wrath of God. And when that's over, there will be a new world. And I think that wrath, more than likely, I could be wrong, could last the entire 1,000 years of the 1,000-year millennium, where the people that were taken before the wrath of God, and the people that, remember, the 144,000 had the seal put on them, they were saved, plus all the people in the grave under the altar that had been killed before that, and cleansed by Christ as he took the keys to hell after the crucifixion and went down there and freed those people. So there's going to be millions and billions of people that will be in that 1,000-year millennium. There'll be some that will be in the wrath of God. You can read about it in the book of Revelation. He says they never turn back. This happens, this happens, this happens, and they still curse our Father. Instead of realizing their Father, they're following Satan into hell. And just take a look at the tribulation of man by man. All you got to do is look at the biggest superpower in the East and their control, complete AI camera control of everything, the way the manipulation is going on. Guys, I can't go into that in detail. Many of you realize what a horror that is. And that is the model for the overlords out of Europe. We're watching it. You watch it. It's a heads up, guys. Be safe.